before we get into the actual text, we got a question. What are you most proud of in your life? What accomplishment, what achievement are you most proud of? You want me to mute this and not record it?
I know we're supposed to have our own identity as a person. However, if I would have to say that in today's world, for me, the fact that our children have turned out to be really good, caring, loving people, mm-hmm. all three of whom each differently tries to follow what they've learned as far as Judaism is concerned, right. And it's a very important part of each of their lives. Mm-hmm. And I've learned through them, and grown, I hope. So I would have to say,
good kids,
the children.
I'm glad she didn't hesitate, because I was chicken to say something so unprofessional, because I am most proud of my family because of the way they all interact and get along and enjoy being together, and have found a place in Judaism for each one of them, each in their own way, and each at their own level, but that it's never negated, that it's always important to them and a part of their lives.
Just so that we don't have to all say children, and just so that anyone who is perhaps proud of something more than their kids doesn't feel bad by saying that.
Right.
Why don't we avoid kids for the rest? That way, we've already established that precedent, and we'll see what else we can get as a range of options. And those are nothing that you shouldn't be proud of. I just don't want anyone to feel awkward if they say, well, I'm really proud of my high score on Donkey Kong, that this is going to somehow sound bad next to people talking about their children.
Right.
Yeah. The word proud is what gave me pause, because there's lots of things I'm happy about. Mm-hmm. When you say I'm proud of that, I started thinking, well, what are the things that I actually can take credit for? So I'm like, kids, well, I guess I can take some credit there, but I felt, the credit shared a lot of these things. But I guess I'm proud of the fact that, I've been able to create a life for my family. So you kind of dream the way your life wants to work out, and things are working out according to what your expectations are in terms of stability and things. And at some point, you have to say it's not just pretending. At some point, it's actually, I guess this does mean adulthood, so to speak. Figure, somewhere before retirement, I should hit adulthood, I'm
sure. You've accomplished something. You've made something there.
Right.
We're talking about the things that we're most proud of. We've covered children. Now we're into other zones. Anyone else feel like chiming in? It's not mandatory.
I would assume that people who have set certain goals for themselves, business-wise, certainly should feel, or educationally, should feel extremely proud mm-hmm. of accomplishing or coming close to accomplishing those goals. People who have, as kids, thought, "Oh, I'm going to get my PhD in da-da-da,"
right.
Who actually do that certainly can feel and should be able to express their sense of accomplishment.
It's funny you should say that. I have no pride at all in earning a PhD postdoc and working for 43 years and all that. I'm supposed to do that. What I'm most proud of is that I've learned to be a good husband.
That's very nice.
So that's I'm lucky.
And he's lucky you didn't refute that accomplishment.
Key operative word is I've learned to be.
Yeah, I heard that.
And I've seen that.
When you think of professionalism, and
But
also,
he is a good
I always put
wife.
things.
She's a good wife.
I always put things in two camps. On the one hand, like educationally or whatever, it almost doesn't feel proud because it's like, well, at this point, it's expected. I passed beyond the proud. It's like finally I get this.
Right.
I would be almost disappointed if it didn't happen. And professionally, there's so much intertwined with fortune and luck and skill and everything that's hard to feel proud of something that happened. If you start to feel, I was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time with the right circumstances. It's hard to feel proud of that. I always associated proud not necessarily with myself, but with somebody else. Like I feel pride towards something my children do.
Right.
I'm thinking, wow, because it's something that you didn't get to the level where you expected. You actually get to the point where they've done something and you're proud of what they've been able to accomplish, because it never fit the category of I expected or I feel fortunate that they did it. It's really, that's where pride falls.
I think
We would like to feel that.
Yeah.
I think it's a generational thing also. The extra degrees for your generation or the generation above you, older than you, immediately older than you.
Because it doesn't
Probably
it doesn't get too
had-
many. I'm already into the middle-aged category, so
Oh, no.
Probably had.
We have a sandwich.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
anything below 50 is still youth.
Hey, if we say we live to 120 like Moses, then that means middle age begins at 60.
There you go. I like that. That works.
Not even close.
I'm not even close in that case.
But for our generation, the accomplishment of education with, and I don't mean self-education, I mean the printed page, the printed document saying you've accomplished something. I think it has a different spin on it than the younger people would.
Well, I want to talk, because we're going to be looking at the ideas of pride and of modesty, but also of the issue of arrogance and how this all plays together. And in Parashat Ekev, we're going to see, as we've continued in numerous places throughout the book of Devarim, to see warnings about pride and arrogance, and how that plays out is very important to the overall Jewish mindset and culture that eventually developed from these ideas. So we are going to be beginning on page 1048. That's Book of Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 10 and verse 12. So as Richard was sort of hinting at, and other people were as well, in order to feel pride, we have to first know what the expectations are. So, for example, if somebody walking in front of you stumbles and falls down, if you reach over and help them up again, would you feel proud about helping them up? Mm-hmm. No, it's a normal minimum human decency. That's what's expected. I can feel happy or fortunate that I was there to help another person, but I'm not going to get a bumper sticker that says, I helped someone up off the floor when I was standing right there and it was easy for me to do. It's expected.
Well, relating to that, there was that terrible windstorm a few days ago where the stage in,
oh yes, in Indiana,
came down.
yes,
and
the Gusnado or whatever they were calling it.
one
yeah.
of the, I think it was the governor of the state, said people ran to help rather than running away to save themselves.
Right.
And
Well, certainly in a dangerous situation, the expectation, the minimum expectation is that you will protect your life
right.
and those of your immediate family around you.
But
and so when you go above and beyond that,
yeah, apparently the majority of the people there, or a good number, ran towards
Right.
to help, and that's
exceeding
incredible.
expectations.
That's
Exactly. Well, in order then to know whether we can be proud or what we should be proud about, we need to know what's expected of us. And of course, the ultimate arbiter of what's expected of us is who gets to set the standard? God. Exactly. It may have seemed too obvious. God gets to set the standard. We are studying Torah after all. What does God expect of us? Who would like to read the answer to that? Okay.
And now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God demand of you? only this, to revere the Lord your God, to walk only in his paths, to love him and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, keeping the Lord's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you today for your good.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah.
What's that? It's not the actual Ve'ahavta, but it does have much of the similar language of the Ve'ahavta. So what does God want? What does God ask of us?
To love him, to serve him.
Okay.
Bless you.
Bless you. I'm
Love.
seizing on the truth.
Yeah.
Service.
Yeah.
Follow the teachings.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the word obey, but that's also
Follow. Well, the word that's usually used is means to either walk in God's ways, the Tao of Torah, or to hearken, to listen and heed what God has said. But notice the very last part, at least in the way this English translation works. Why are we doing this?
For your own good.
For your good. For your good. So, are God's expectations then just flat expectations, or is there an enticement here? I mean, if I tell my child, I expect you to get straight A's, is that the same statement as saying, I expect you to get straight A's because otherwise you won't be able to do whatever it is you wish to do? Is it the same statement from a parent?
it's. I would put it in the same category because I don't want my child to get straight A's so that I have bragging rights that my child.
You
want.
yes.
I want them to get straight A's because I feel that will provide him or her options and opportunities.
To get a good job so they can support you later.
So,
Okay.
because
As long
we
as
know
it's about me, that's important.
Because we know Social Security isn't going to be there. So the idea then would be, if they get straight A's, are they doing it to meet your expectations, or are they doing it for themselves?
They're doing it for themselves, although they might not recognize it that way.
Okay, so then you can't really say they're just obeying you. So now, if it was the obedience that we want, putting an enticement seems to defeat the measure of obedience. Because after all, the most clear example of obedience or hearkening or following or whatever you want to call it to make yourself more comfortable is to do something you otherwise wouldn't do because you have been asked. If someone asks, if your spouse says, would you like to take a vacation to the Bahamas, and the Bahamas is the most beautiful place you can imagine on earth, saying, yes, let's go, is not doing something for the other person. You're doing it for the two of you, presumably. However, if they say, I really would like to visit Iceland, and Iceland is the last place on earth you ever would want to set foot on, and you say, you know what, my spouse really wants to do this, it's been a lifelong dream, I can give up one of my vacations out of my whole life to do what their dream is, and I'll just grin and bear it, and it'll be okay. That's a different statement.
Yes.
Still a vacation, but it's a different statement of connection and obedience. So what is God really asking us to do then? If he gets this whole idea of doing things that following the commandments and what we have done for our good, what does God really expect of us then? If he takes away some of the obedience simply by making it good for us. We'll come back to that thought, but we got to get more text down.
Mark the heavens to their uttermost reaches belong to the Lord your God, the earth and all that is on it.
Okay. Now, just quick aside, this isn't the main focus of the discussion today, but I wanted to point out just one of those great close readings of texts. Why in the world would God go on to say that he owns everything in the universe? According to the Midrash, it's in order to tell us that God only gave us the commandments and asked us to serve him and worship him and do all these wonderful things the Torah says for us, because there's nothing we could do that would benefit God. We bring a cow as a sacrifice. We haven't given God anything. God owned the cow before we brought it for a sacrifice. If we conquer territory to glorify God's name, we haven't done anything because God already owns the whole earth. So it's trying to reinforce this idea that what God has done is for our benefit entirely. not for God's. Which again makes it much harder. God's the person you just has everything. You don't know what to give him to show how much you love him. So let's keep going.
Yet it was to your fathers that the Lord was drawn in his love for them, so that he chose you, their lineal descendants, from among all peoples, as is now the case. Cut away, therefore, the thickening about your hearts.
It's actually the foreskin of your hearts, but they translated as thickening in order to avoid the uncomfortable imagery for some people. Circumcise your hearts, exactly.
Cut away, therefore, the thickening about your hearts, and stiffen your necks no more. For the Lord your God is God supreme and Lord supreme, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who shows no favor and takes no bribe, that upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and befriends the stranger, providing him with food and clothing. You too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Okay. Are we any closer to figuring out what we can give God that God doesn't already have?
Some of these words are what we should be practicing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, if we did more of us did put these words into practice, we would be giving God something of a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what he wants of us.
Okay, so what Marion is pointing out, what God really wants of us, well, I'm going to add two, but the one that you're focusing on at the moment is God wants us to put into practice the goodness, the righteousness, the structure of the world that God wishes. And that's something God doesn't already have. This world is not perfect, I think. Most of us can recognize that pretty easily. And as much as many people do behave at a certain level of minimal civil expectation, not everyone, but many do, there is much more that we could do to make this world a better place that needs to be done by us. And those actions, what in Judaism we call the fulfillment of mitzvot, is something that we can do. But deeper than just doing that, there's another level that is being mentioned here that God wants from us. Not simply that we do as told, even though that is definitely one thing that we can give. Oh, what's this whole stuff with the heart with a foreskin around it?
You know, what the basic is you have to open your heart to others. You have to, it says here, you too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of
Mm-hmm.
Egypt. So you have to be open to other people, a certain amount, not only of tolerance, but also, extending that olive branch to people that are not necessarily like you and understanding.
The extra mile, as it were.
Exactly.
And I think the phrase you used to open yourself is could be put even more broadly of what God is asking from us, which is to open ourselves to others and to God. That the only thing that we can give God that God does not already have is ourselves. I mean, yes, we're God's children in that sense that we belong to God, but we have to willingly choose to want to have God in our life and to want to create our life around the instructions, the teachings, the guidance that God has given us. In the Talmud it says that everything is in the hands of heaven except reverence of heaven, or often translated fear of heaven, which means that internal sense of awe and wonder and majesty and love that this section of Torah is calling upon us to give. That everything else in the world, God's already got. Everything else in the world, God can control. The one thing that can't be controlled, the one thing that isn't already in God's possession, is our willing connection to God. And through that, our willing connection to other people. And that's often, for many of us, something that comes much, much later than obedience. We may learn to obey the traffic rules before we learn to respect the traffic rules. And here we're being given a similar lesson, that yes, God wants us to obey and follow the commandments and to bring the good to ourselves in the world that is built into the commandments regardless of our intentions. But ultimately God is asking for even more of us. That deepest part of our heart that we normally keep shielded, using the metaphor of the foreskin, that we normally keep hidden and unexposed to the world or to God. Let's keep going, because then we're going to get to some of the issues.
You must revere the Lord your God. Only him shall you worship. To him shall you hold fast, and by his name shall you swear. He is your glory, and he is your God, who wrought for you those marvelous, awesome deeds that you saw with your own eyes. Your ancestors went down to Egypt, 70 persons in all, and now the Lord your God has made you as numerous as the stars of the heaven.
Okay. Even though we just got told last week that we're not the most numerous, now we are being compared to the stars. There's numerous and then numerous. And God wants to make sure that we understand our place in the world, that we're not the most populous nation, but we also shouldn't consider ourselves to be unimportant. Okay. I would like to have someone pick up on chapter 11, New Voice. It's always good to share it out. Richard?
Love, therefore, the Lord your God, and always keep his charge, his laws, his rules, and his commandments. Take thought this day that it will not be your children who neither experience nor witness the lesson of the Lord your God. His majesty, his mighty land, his outstretched arms, the signs and the deeds that he performed in Egypt against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and all his land. What he did to Egypt's army, its horses and chariots, how the Lord rolled back upon them the waters of the sea of reeds when they were pursuing you, thus destroying them once and for all. What he did for you in the wilderness before you arrived in this place, and what he did to Dathan and Abiram, son of Eliab, son of Reuben, when the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them, along with their households, their tents, and every living thing in their train from amidst all Israel. But that it was you who saw with your own eyes all the marvelous deeds that the Lord performed.
Okay, so that is a very long aside there in the middle, but really the verse would be complete without it, which is basically, your kids didn't see all the wonders God has seen, or God has shown you, you saw it. Meaning the descendants of the generation that is now about to enter the land of Israel will not have witnessed all of the miracles of Egypt and the wilderness and everything else that happened during the last 40 years. So?
It's okay.
Low door for door. So you have to be able to pass that down.
So you have to be able to pass it down. And more than just pass down the knowledge of it, you have to be able to pass down the passion of what occurred, the feeling of having been there. And you have to be able to pass down an awe of what God accomplished for us. And that word awe and respect and reverence is going to keep coming back again and again. Because as we're going to see, one of the biggest fears that the book of Deuteronomy has, and that is well founded by Jewish history, is that we will lose that sense of reverence for God as soon as we are no longer sheltered like a baby in the arms of God. That we will forget our mother, our father, our God, as soon as we are not receiving daily doses of miracle. And that can be a problem. Carry on.
Keep, therefore, all the instruction that I have enjoined upon you today, so that you may have the strength to enter and take possession of the land that you are about to cross into and possess, and that you may long endure upon the soul that the Lord swore to your fathers to assign to them and to their heirs, a land flowing with milk and honey.
Okay, keep going. Now we're going to find something special about the land's spiritual nature.
For the land that you are about to enter and possess is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come.
Wait, it's not like Egypt? Why in the world of this whole discussion of awe and reverence and keeping and loving and all of this are we talking about there's a difference between Israel and Egypt? Well, I mean, on the one hand, that's so obvious. I mean, Egypt is over there and Israel's over here. It's a different land. So it's going to go on to talk about an irrigational difference of Egypt, which is going to be one of our focuses.
There, the grain you sowed had to be watered by your own laborers like a vegetable garden. But the land you're about to cross into and possess, a land of hills and valleys, soaks up its water from the rains of heaven. It is a land which the Lord your God looks after, on which the Lord your God always keeps his eye from the year's beginning to year's end.
Okay. Visual aids. The difference between Egypt, what's that?
Color pictures.
Color for a change. Well, some things look best in color. There is a fundamental difference in agriculture between Israel and Egypt. Now, for most of us, that probably would seem rather inconsequential. But what the Torah is pointing out, and as we're going to see the commentators also grab a hold of, is that difference in agriculture makes a difference in spirituality. So, in Egypt, if you wanted to water your fields, what did you do?
You went to the stream and you got water and you brought it over.
You went to the stream? You didn't go to the stream, you went to where?
The Nile.
The Nile.
The river.
The river, as it is referred to. The river. It's, Hanachal. It's not just a river, it's the river. In fact, it's such the river that oftentimes in the Tanakh it doesn't even get a title. It's just called the river. This river has a very profound effect on the way Egypt works. It floods yearly, in fact, precisely according to the seasons, and so it was something that could be relied upon exactly to occur. And that flooding would refertilize the soil and provide some irrigation, but then the majority of the irrigation came from this ever-flowing, constant body of water brought by human effort. Brought by people with buckets, brought by people with these wonderful little well dooley bobbies, where you would dip it in, pull it out, turn it around, water your field. Brought later by the Archimedes screw, a wonderful invention. You could turn a handle crank and it would pull water up. All sorts of wonderful inventions for people to get the water from where it was in the Nile to where they needed it in the field. And even to this day, if you look at a Google Earth satellite image of Egypt, you will see a strip of green right along the length of the Nile. As far as humans are able to easily transport the water inland, that's where Egypt lives and grows. Everything beyond the reaches of human agency to bring water from the Nile in is dead. So what grows because of what the people are able to do. How about Egypt? How about Israel? Jordan River, yes, it floods annually. No, not really.
No, the rainfall is very important.
The rainfall is everything.
Yeah.
The rainfall is everything. Yes, there are underground springs, and yes, the Jordan River helps along that area, but the vast majority of biblically stationed agriculture was rain dependent. If the rains didn't come at the right time, or if they didn't come with enough rain, you were out of luck. You were going to starve. There was just no way around it. There was no easy way to get enough buckets to water all of the terraces of the hillsides, which is where the agriculture was primarily located. Hence the picture on the right-hand side. So, in order for there to be agriculture in Israel, where did you have to look for help? God, or up to the heavens, depending upon your theology. You were ever watching the sky to make sure you would get what you needed. In Egypt, in order to make sure things grew, what did you concern yourself with? The river? And even more basic than that,
Your own hand.
Human labor.
yourself. I mean, if you wanted to grow, you went and got the water. If you did not get up in the morning and go get the water, things didn't grow. So if something didn't grow, you just blamed yourself for being too lazy. In Israel, if something didn't grow, where did we put the problem?
That we weren't behaving appropriately
We weren't.
enough for
And
God
therefore?
to reward us.
Okay, so we get the metaphor, which we're about to read, of the rains being seen as a symbol of reward or punishment. Because if we were righteous, the rains would come. If we were not, the rains would not.
There's a lot of beliefs around the world that follow a similar pattern.
American Indian.
Exactly, this one come to mind amongst others. Rain dances and punishment, and what has God done to make this drought and things like that.
Well, let's see how the Torah handles this.
All right.
So we're on verse 13, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. If then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving him with all your heart and your soul, I will grant the rain for your land in season, the early rain and the late. You shall gather in your new grain and wine and oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. Take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them, for the Lord's anger will flare up against you, and he will shut up the skies so that there will be no rain on the ground and not yield its produce. And you will soon perish from the good land that the Lord is assigning to you. Therefore impress these my words upon your very heart. Bind them as a sign upon your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. And teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. And inscribe them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers as a sign to them, as long as there is a heaven over the earth.
Okay. Sound familiar?
Yes.
What's that?
Second paragraph.
This is part of the Shema, isn't it?
It's the second paragraph of the Shema. You know, we have 3 sections in the Shema. There's the Shema Neve'ahavta. Then there is this section. And the final section talks about tzitzit, the talit, exactly, which is actually one of the what we're going to be doing for the nutshell this week. If you want to learn more about talit and where the mitzvah comes from, how it works, and all of that, as well as our discussion about techelet, the blue will also continue this week. But this paragraph, in just about every synagogue you go to, doesn't usually get said out loud. The first paragraph, the Shema Neve'ahavta, all the time. The last paragraph, in many congregations, will also be chanted out loud, where we kiss the tzitzit every time you mention them during the recitation. This paragraph doesn't get as much screen time.
Why?
What's my question? Why? Or why not?
It sounds repetitive.
I mean, certainly, impress these words upon your children, bind them as a sign upon your hand. We just did that in the Ve'ahavta.
We do other things that are, we say.
Well, we do other things that are repetitive, too. We have no problem with repetition in Judaism. Come on.
But that may be why it's not emphasized.
It may be why it's not emphasized. I think, actually, one of the reasons it's not emphasized is precisely for the reason that Richard was alluding to, which is this is a little awkward. It's difficult to understand what's going on here. It's difficult to be at peace with the idea that the skies have shut up and the rain hasn't come and drought and famine have occurred because we were bad people.
As a punishment.
Because do we really want to believe that every bit of misery we go through is a punishment? And that awkwardness makes us sometimes just want to say it quietly and get it over with and move on. But there are other ways to understand that. Handouts? Who'd like to be Rashbam, Rashi's grandson?
I'll be Rashba.
Oh, okay.
I would want you to be a grandson.
That's a lifelong ambition.
It felt this way.
And now you can be proud that you have achieved your dream.
This is part of the structure of these portions of the Torah. You need to observe the commandments of the Lord your God, for the land of Israel cannot be compared to the land of Egypt, being superior in quality to the land of Egypt for the people who observe God's laws.
Okay, that last part, for the people who observe God's laws, is Rashbam's important addition to the verse. Meaning, yes, Israel is different than Egypt, because it can be superior to Egypt if the people observe God's laws. On the other hand,
At the same time, it will prove inferior to the land of Egypt for people who do not observe God's laws.
so at the same time, Israel is both better and worse than Egypt. It's better if you follow Torah, and it'll be a lot worse if you don't. Egypt is a known quantity. There's a big honking river, all the water you need, go get it, you're done. In Israel, every year is going to be a wonderful case of stress and worry of whether or not the rains are going to come at just the right time and in just the right amount.
And that hasn't really changed.
No, it hasn't. No, that type of climate for Israel has not really changed.
Proof of this can be seen already in the fact that the land of Egypt enjoys constant irrigation from the river Nile and does not need rain. On the other hand, the land of Israel is totally dependent on rainfall at the proper time of the year. The Egyptians enjoy the irrigation regardless of their being God-fearing or not. Their staple foods are assured. The land of Israel, on the other hand, is constantly under the detailed scrutiny of the Lord your God.
Gee, thanks, God. So they're always going to be well-fed even if they're evil, and we get to starve if we're evil.
Say the same thing about Southern California, the best farmland in the world, and it all depends how much rain they get.
Except we didn't say that God chose to give us Southern California. Some people may act like that, but
Is that not in there somewhere? In Hollywood, I thought it is these days.
whereas in the Torah, there is a belief that God chose Israel to be our inheritance. And there's a certain feeling that was probably more strongly felt by our ancestors than by us today, who are so far removed from agriculture, that we didn't necessarily get the easiest place in the world to enjoy that bounty. Not just because of the wars and strife and all that sort of thing, but even on a basic geographical level, there are other places God could have chosen that would have given us a much easier time of it.
I think it's maybe, I don't know, convenient is the right word. There's many years that Jews didn't occupy most of Israel, yet the rainfall was probably relatively consistent throughout the millennium, in terms of how much rain they got and how fertile the land was and things like that. Whether or not the people that were living there were God-fearing and followed Torah or not.
Unfortunately, we don't have the data for that. From the climatology. We do know that the land was not in good shape when the early Zionists were coming back, that a great deal of work needed to be done of reforestation and of rivers that had been allowed to spread into swamps and all sorts of other issues. Malaria was a huge killer in Israel at the turn of the 1900s. That's no longer a case. You can argue that's because of God's beneficence, because the Jews have finally taken possession of their land again, or you can say it's because the Jews have
modern agriculture,
put a lot of work into it.
And exactly.
And indeed, a lot of the questions that surround many of Israel's modern agricultural concerns, people say, look, we don't need additional land in the West Bank or Gaza. We've got the entire Negev desert. And with proper utilization of the resources already at hand, we can irrigate the desert. We can make the desert bloom. And indeed, if you go down into the desert, you can see amazing agricultural programs that have made whole large blocks of the desert green and verdant for whatever they're growing at the time. And there are other people who say, well, we shouldn't be doing that because that's the Egyptian way. Based on this, that's not the Israelite way. The Egyptian way is to say, I can make this bloom with my own effort. And the Israelite way is to say, if God wants me to have water, I'll have water. Oh my!
At this day and age, for anybody to have that kind of an attitude strikes me as being kind of bizarre.
Well, I would hate to take that to its logical conclusion.
And indeed, and we'll get to that.
Oh, I know.
Israelis were the
That's what I have a problem.
World leaders.
Didn't they develop I think it's called hydroponic
Hydroponic
irrigation.
And all the drip irrigation you see
Yes,
around
yes.
was also developed in Israel. Exactly. However, that was developed mostly between the periods of 1948 and 1967.
Yeah, I was going to say 1970.
When Israel did have good farmland up in the north in the Galil, and some along the coastal plains, but not all of it was in great shape, and we didn't have complete control of the Jordan River. And so we needed to husband our resources in different ways. Now that the West Bank and for a while the Gaza Strip were in Israel's control, there were many people who said, well, why should we work harder to make the desert bloom when we can more easily farm in areas that are more naturally farmable, and indeed are the historic breadbaskets of the land?
The Nile would be a great place.
The Nile would be a great place. And was it 3 weeks ago? We talked about the fact that there are some people that believe the Nile should be part of Israel. when we looked at the various minimalist and maximalist borders of Israel, depending upon how you read different chapters. What's that? There, from river to river, from the Euphrates to the Nile, are what some people believe is what God promised Abraham. But that was a class we already did. So, how do we absorb this? How do we understand this idea that God would deliberately give us this vulnerable land, and somehow this was a blessing? Well, it comes back to the idea of how we look at our accomplishments. Richard, when you first began talking about your own accomplishments, you said, you were, of course, proud of your children, but you weren't sure how much of that you could take credit for. And much of what the sages begin to look at is the idea that what God was trying to structure was a built-in check against human arrogance. That the great problem of Egypt was arrogance. It's most exemplified in their ruler, Pharaoh, who believed himself to be a god, and as we see, believed himself able to challenge God as one god to another. And in the end, brought his own country into ruin. That was what we were trying to avoid in Israel. We were trying to avoid the idea that people are God. That is considered to be the ultimate form of hubris, the ultimate form of arrogance within the Jewish tradition. To imagine that everything that we have achieved, we achieved. That everything that has blossomed, has bloomed, has gone our way, is only because of our own doing. Which is why when it says in the paragraphs that we just read, and verse 16, which is at the top of 1053, take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them. Well, it specifically comes after the verse that says, I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. And our sages notice this juxtaposition, that it was once we had accomplished and had gained this bounty, that we would become most likely to grow arrogant, to grow prideful of ourselves, to think that all of our accomplishments were our own. And once you do that, you don't need God. You might as well pick another idol, or hey, go the Egyptian route and make yourself the god. When things are going well, it's a lot easier to forget God than when things are going bad. Which seems counterintuitive to most of us, and yet historically it has been the case. Most of the time when we have been under oppression or occupation or under edicts of destruction, Jews have remained tenacious in their devotion to their faith. And when things have become easier, more relaxed, and less problematic for us, oftentimes you'll find that's when assimilation becomes the most prevalent. That's when people leave Judaism in the largest numbers. And similarly throughout other religions as well. You will often find more piety among the poor than among the rich. And that arrogance comes from a sense of, who do I owe my accomplishments to? Who do I owe my daily bread to? Is the answer the Torah wants us to reach. But it's not the answer that many of us reach if we feel that we did it. It's my own accomplishments. Let's take a look at a few...
So
Rabbi,
how do you balance that?
Well, we're going to get to that in a second.
But doesn't the piety of oppression
Right.
come from also the desire for help? Please, God, help me. I can't do it without you.
It comes
But
exactly
that
from...
strengthens the piety.
Well, what I would say, just to slightly reword what you said, it comes from vulnerability.
Okay.
That if you feel vulnerable, you will turn to God for help. But if you feel that you are invulnerable, then what do you need God for? And feeling invulnerable is the prerogative of those who have been most successful in life, those who enjoy the most in life. And oftentimes, you'll find someone who feels very successful. When things go bad, suddenly they will re-find a need for faith in their life, whether it be an illness, whether it be an economic setback or a natural disaster or what have you. when that feeling of vulnerability returns, it'll often rekindle some form of piety. Often. But let's get a few more readings in, and then we're going to discuss this in more detail. Who'd like to read a little bit from the Talmud? I know everyone loves the Talmud. This part's not that bad, trust me.
Where
On the back page.
17? Oh.
On the back page of
Bavli.
the handout where it says Bavli.
Ben Zoma once saw a large crowd of people on the Temple Mount. He said, "Blessed is the knower of secrets, and blessed is he who has created all these people to serve me." He used to say, "Look how hard Adam had to work until he found a loaf of bread to eat. He plowed, he sowed, he harvested, he bound sheaves, he threshed, he winnowed, he selected, he ground, he sifted, he kneaded, and he baked. Only after all this effort was he able to eat. But I wake up in the morning and I find all these things done for me." Rabban.
Digest. Have to digest his bread, his loaf. Is that arrogance or humility?
I don't know.
To look at a crowd of people and say that, God, you have made all of these to serve me. Humility? Because?
I don't see that as being humble.
Because?
Because he's thankful to God for having made all these people. Because so he doesn't have to do everything in order to eat his bread. He wakes up and it's prepared. So he's thanking. It's not so much that it's not, the emphasis is not on that these people here are here to serve me, but thank you for making people who do all this work so that we all can eat.
Thank God for making ditch diggers. It's just what it feels like to me. It's so I don't have to. To me it feels a little. I don't know. Arrogance is the right word. Elitist is what it strikes me as. It's thank God we got all these riffraff to take care of all the small stuff for me, so I can just sit back and eat my bread.
Other ideas? Feelings? Still digesting? The bread was coarser back there. It took a lot longer to chew. Didn't have the same processed flour.
Takes a lot longer to make, going through all these steps.
Well, this is still how we make bread.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
nothing has actually changed in the process of making
And
bread.
we have all these people
But
who do this.
But we have other people who are preparing the flour, going through all these early steps before we go to the grocery store to buy the bag of flour.
So you mean we're benzoma too?
Yes.
It also,
But we don't even
if
say
we were to
that.
put this in modern context, you might say, well, I'd like to thank God for making sure that we have an iPhone so that anytime I need to speak to anyone, I just need to reach in my pocket and I can call.
Or you might say, I'd like to thank God for all the people who work at Foxconn in China that have a high suicide rate for their oppressive
Right, so
labor
that I can
regime,
afford
so that
such
I
a
can
wonderful
have an iPhone.
Yes.
Well, but there is a certain statement there. Are we thanking God for all the people who work hard to serve me, or are we thanking God that there is a society that allows us to work each in our own way to do this? Because there wasn't just one person out there making bread for him. He's talking about a multitude of different jobs, a multitude of different people working here. And saying when it was just one person who did what he needed, it was harder than having a society with a division of labor. That Adam on his own had to do all these things himself, and that was pretty tiring. We live in a society, and yes, he is in one part of the elite, that can enjoy the same thing that Adam enjoyed without exhausting each of ourselves to the same extent. Even the thresher, when he's done threshing, can go home and have bread. He doesn't have to move from his threshing onto his winnowing, because that's the next guy's job.
It strikes me as very unholy in a sense, that, like associating God with his circumstances. It's the same way we'd say, thank God we have iPhones today. The associating God with how the world that's been created,
Right.
it seems to have very little to do with God directly, maybe indirectly through inspiring people.
So why do we say a blessing before we eat food? Why do we say Hamotzi lechem min haaretz? The God is the one that brought forth bread from the earth. And there have actually been many people who have argued that, well, first of all, God didn't bring this forth. a lot of people who
There are
are
bread trees out
farmers,
there.
well, a lot of people who are farmers, and then doubly, and what God may have brought forth, the first wheat seed in the first place, isn't a bread tree. God gave us, clay. That doesn't mean God gave us bricks. God gave us seeds. That doesn't mean God gave us bread. So why do we thank God for bread? And what Ben Zoma here is intimating is that it is because of all of the different stages in the world of having to work together to provide the final product, that if we reduce everything back to the original status, we still find a connection to God. And that if we lose that connection, just as if we lose the connection to all the people who participate in the production of the lifestyle that we have, whether it be in Ben Zoma's time or our own, that we become more prone to arrogance, not less. Recognizing that there are people toiling in China to produce an iPhone doesn't make me feel better about myself, although I don't have an iPhone. It doesn't make me feel that I'm at the top of the food chain. It might make me more aware that there are other people who don't enjoy all of the benefits of the modern world the way I do. Recognizing that there are people who are toiling away in fields and wondering whether or not they are being fairly compensated doesn't make me prouder of my place in the food chain. Might make me a little bit more comfortable and happy with the fact that I'm not doing that. But it can also inspire me to not forget that I don't have a God-given right to a warm loaf of bread on my table in the morning. But a lot goes into providing that.
Modern day, right now, I think a lot of us don't even want to think about the people toiling away, being almost in a slave kind of environment. We like our material toys, and it's like, don't talk to me. I know there are many people who are concerned,
of course.
but I think the majority of us tend to kind of like push us to the back. I don't want to hear about this. I want the newest iPhone that's on the market.
And I worked hard for my money to buy it. I mean, I deserve it. I mean, why should I be?
Yeah.
Why should I be, burdened with all the social ills of the entire planet when I'm just doing something that I've earned, that I've deserved? I mean, I'm not responsible for their condition. Massive geopolitical forces far beyond my control are responsible for their condition. So let me just enjoy what I've earned.
Well, yeah. It also makes the assumption that the condition was worsened by the fact that they now have a factory and a job and they produce,
As opposed to
improve dramatically.
Yeah.
So it's.
Yeah.
I think it all.
There is that.
It is very, very complicated. And what continues to come back again and again, both in the section we read and in the text that we're reading here, is the idea just to put a chink in that armor of what we create, the Egyptian mind, that we created all of this and that everything is for our own benefit and that we can control it all ourselves. Just putting a chink into that mental shield that we have to say, well, actually sometimes we owe it to other people. Sometimes we are dependent upon other people. Ben Zoma knew that if these other people disappeared, he'd have no bread. Right? He didn't have a field to go out and farm and winnow and thresh and do all that stuff himself. I mean, if all the people in the world that made bread disappeared, he'd go without bread. He was dependent upon them. Yes, that may be somewhat elitist, but he's recognizing the interconnectivity there. And that feeling of being vulnerable, of being dependent, whether it be upon other people or whether it be upon God, and not feeling that what we have and what we've accomplished is entirely of our own making, and therefore our own ability to control and defend, is what is being discussed within this middle section of the Shema.
Well, going back to what Richard said at the very, very beginning of the hour, he talked about being in the right place at the right time, of having that luck is involved. It isn't only his own hard work. There were other factors that somebody could have worked just as hard and not had the same good results.
There's actually a wonderful computer game that I highly recommend if you're interested. It's called Real Lives. It's just like a little text, data type of game. You can find it online that lets you get born according to current statistics.
Oh.
So you click, be born, and 1 out of 4 times you're going to be born in China, 1 out of 5 times you'll be born in India, and you will be born according to the poverty rates in those countries and according to the gender percentiles, and you'll have the same opportunities, and you'll make decisions as you go along. And so you might be killed at the age of 2 by measles or something if you're growing up in sub-Saharan Africa. And if you just play through enough iterations, you'll see the chances of being born to what is probably your current status in life are astronomically thin. And it really does help you appreciate the luck involved of being born where you're born.
So can we transfer the word luck and being in the right place at the right time to God's actions?
So now we come to the second level problem. I was hoping we'd get to this. We have a little bit less time than I hoped. I'm very glad that we got there. Because wait a minute. If we're now saying that it's God's providence and God is taking care of us, then aren't we back in the boat of saying we've earned what we've got? My righteousness earned me this. Not my schlepping of water in and out of the river, but the rains came because I was righteous. So I'm back to earning it, which of course means those who aren't blessed didn't earn it because they weren't righteous. So now my obedience to God, just as we began with our first problem, is for my own benefit. And I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just earning it in a different way. Rather than by material efforts, I'm earning it through spiritual efforts.
But using rain as the example, it doesn't rain on my piece of ground, and Sandy, who lives half a block away, not rain on her piece of ground.
I like the way you made yourself the pious one. Correct. The rain falls on the righteous and wicked alike. When it rains, it falls on both.
Yeah.
And that becomes an issue. So we have a couple more pieces of text that we need to go through, hopefully to get at least one response. There are multiple ways to respond to this, but this is at least one. I believe you were reading. Go ahead.
Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai received from the oral tradition from Hillel and Shammai. He used to say, if you have learned much Torah, do not claim credit for yourself, because for such a purpose were you created.
So as we talked about before, minimal expectations. If you become some great and wise Torah scholar, you don't get to lord it over people. You don't get to walk around with your nose in the air saying, I've learned so much more than you and I should be respected and I should be da-da-da-da-da, because that's your purpose in life. You don't get credit for doing the minimum. Extra credit is when you do more than the teacher asked you to do. And then you can be proud of your extra credit, but this, you're just living up to your expectations. With regards to observance and understanding of all of this, in Judaism, performance of mitzvot are not about extra credit. The performance of mitzvot are about what we call chiyuv, which means debt. We are born with a debt to God. We are born with a debt to the covenant, our obligation, our part of that contract. The same way that if two companies sign a contract, they each have a liability, that they have to fulfill their part of the contract. And it's only when they've fulfilled their part of the contract that they have done what is necessary to get rid of that liability. If I owe you $5,000, that's a negative on my balance sheet until I've paid it off. And that's what we call yotze. When you fulfill the mitzvah, you are yotze. You have exited, you have left that state of obligation. So we don't start off at 0 in Judaism, and then every time you do a mitzvah, you go up. We start off at negative 13, roughly put. And every time you do a mitzvah, you go up until eventually you hit 0 and you're yotze. Now you've done your minimum. And if you do something else that was beyond the minimum, like taking someone who is poor and indigent into your house, which is far and above beyond what God asked for us to do with tzedakah, now you are doing more than God asked you to do. But we start off here. And the great thing is, for many of these mitzvot, they reset every day. So you don't get to be proud that you've done it. You just get to be relieved that you've been able to fulfill your duty, which is a different feeling.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the last quote from Jeremiah.
Thus said the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches, but let him that glories glory in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord, which exercise loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, said the Lord.
Which is the Haftarah that we read on Tisha B'Av itself, for when we commemorate the destruction and catastrophes that have befallen us. So, what are you proud of? It's a trick question. It's okay. Pride is a very tricky thing in Judaism. We want to feel accomplishments. We want to feel pride, and it's certainly we say Yasher Koach to people. We say Mazel Tov to people when they do a good job, when they've done something exceptional. But Judaism is also very worried that pride, whether it be material pride or spiritual pride, will lead us into a feeling that we have earned whatever we've got. And once you start down that thought process, then you become very vulnerable to the same types of corruption that plagued Egypt in the ancient world, which is the creation of your own deification of yourself. And indeed, that's very much what happened in the modern philosophical sense. When Nietzsche proclaimed God is dead, what he was really proclaiming was that man was the new God, which is why out of his philosophy of the Übermensch, Nazism became such an easy thought. Once you have killed off everything higher than man becomes the highest of all. Once you are invulnerable to anything except each other, then only your ability to control that vulnerability and to master others is important. And there is no end to the arrogance and pride that can follow. But if you realize that you are constantly in a state of vulnerability, you realize that you're constantly in a state of dependency. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be going around looking for a handout, but it does mean that your own pride, your own arrogance will be well checked. And that's why we have that second paragraph in the Shema. Other questions? Other comments? There's a lot more to be said on this, obviously. There's always more to be said. So keep studying. Okay. Take care, everyone. See you on Shabbat, I hope, or next week at least.